Well, good morning, everybody. Jeff Slakey and Spencer Hughes during the Daybreak Show. It's time to start up our candidate conversations as the primary election draws near. I've reached out to all the candidates running for the positions for 35th Legislative District, both position 1 and 2, and I'm expecting to have all of those candidates join me for a candidate conversation. Right now, we have Colton Myers, and his website is electcoltonmyers.com. He is running for the 35th District Legislative position in position 1. And Colton, how are you doing? Thanks for coming on.
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me on. I've got my coffee poured, and I'm excited and eager to talk to our Mason County residents today.
Ready for a conversation then? Well, let's just start off. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I would be happy to. So my name is Colton Myers. Again, I'm running for the State House seat, position 1 in the 35th LD. I grew up in the Kitsap County part of this district, actually. 3 generations of my family have grown up in that Kitsap County part of the 35th LD. I have very fond memories, growing up at my grandmother's house, my Wawa's house up there. I attended graduate school at the University of Washington and decided during that time, I devoted my research studies actually out in Mason County. I was working with community health and safety leaders led by North Mason Chief Bo Bakken, who's a good friend of mine, to lead the opioid response. We were developing a strategic framework response to the opioid epidemic. And then I now live in the Thurston County part of the 35th District, where I live in Olympia, and I work for Washington State Healthcare Authority as a senior health policy analyst.
The 35th District, as you know from living basically on both ends, is very large and pretty diverse. Tell me a little bit about what the portions of your background that could key into helping out those folks in the 35th.
Yeah, well, I think I have, again, a really intrinsic background in the sense that I have almost touched upon every single county in some shape or form. And I really believe that I bring my lived professional and educational experience into this. Obviously, I grew up in Kitsap County. To share you a little bit of personal backstory. I grew up at a time where I was still a very young, closeted individual growing up in a community that didn't always welcome me. I had a lot of disparaging things said about me by classmates, by community members, people that really made me feel like I didn't have a space. And for me, admittedly, when I had the opportunity to go back to graduate school, I didn't know that I would move back to the district in earnest. I thought, here's my opportunity to kind of go start a new life, be in a place that welcomes me, push for change, work for the city or county and call it good. And, the more I thought about throughout my studies, and I thought about the opportunities that my family provided me to succeed in life, to have the opportunity to go to school, are just not the opportunities that exist in the 35th any longer. By every metric, our district has fallen behind and been taken for granted. Our socioeconomic outcomes rank in the bottom of the state. Our educational outcomes in Mason County rank in the bottom of the state. Our health access and opportunities and outcomes rank near the bottom of the state. We have a lot of challenges that existed prior to COVID that are now exacerbated by COVID. When moving back to the district and getting a job for Healthcare Authority, I believe it was a very, very timely and almost serendipitous role to be working in health policy right now, given that we're facing one of the worst pandemics of this century, in a century really. I believe that I'm bringing my health experience, being on the inside of seeing, these response efforts, being on the inside of seeing how we have to improve our healthcare delivery system, how critical and important access right now to telehealth is, and telebehavioral health in our communities, especially out in Mason County, as you mentioned, where it's very geographically sparse. And we have, of course, issues with broadband connectivity. And so, for me, it's really, I'm coming into this as someone who's grown up in this community. I know this community. I've got deep working class roots to this community. I tell the story of my father a lot. He's a 3rd generation electrical union worker. He's been a member of the IBEW for almost 40 years. And when he was trying to get his first job with Puget Sound Energy some years ago, I won't date him, he waited outside of Puget Sound Energy every single day with his resume in hand for a year, asking for work to support his family. I know what good livable wage jobs look like because that job and what the union provided to my family was economic mobility, financial stability, healthcare. Those are tenets that must be protected in our community. Those are things that I believe have fallen behind in our community, and those are issues that I am firmly advocating for in our community.
A lot of times in the state house during legislative session, a lot of the ways that the state moves forward through the session and the bills and laws that eventually get signed have a lot to do with the more urban areas, the King counties, and kind of that whole I-5 corridor. How would, if you were to get in, would you work to make sure that the folks across the state are able to understand not only the urban centers in Kitsap and in Olympia, but also that major rural portion? Because the way business is done in urban settings versus rural settings is completely different.
Absolutely. Well, and to that point, I would say this is why it matters who is at the table. We have had representatives who have not been part of the majority party for over 5 years now. That hurts our district because it means that we are not at the decision-making table of the majority party, being able to advocate for our community's needs, for their interests, for the investments, and we're seeing the ramifications of that. You know, like I said, I am largely running because our district has fallen behind and been taken for granted by what I believe to be ineffective leadership. And it is so critical that we have someone at the decision making table, that we can have someone from the majority party who lives in these communities, who knows these communities, and can advocate for their best interest. Because, as I said, I do not believe, even in the minority party, that our representatives, if they were in the majority party, would do an effective job advocating for our community's interests.
If you were to make it into the House of Representatives and you were asked about committee assignments or further ways to be a part of the process, is healthcare and those types of scenarios the types of things that you would like to lean to, or are there other parts of state government that you would like to dive deeper into and focus on for the 35th?
Well, healthcare is certainly one of my top goals and priorities, given both the outcomes in our district, the lack of access in our district, but also, you know, it is my background, it is my trade. I'm working and running to provide quality, affordable healthcare to all Washingtonians. And as I said, I was kind of on the front lines of that when I got to work in Mason County to develop an opioid response plan. I got to see where the gaps in our recovery systems are for opioid and substance use disorder. I got to see where our gaps in our healthcare delivery system were, and the co-occurring challenges that go hand in hand with substance use disorder. And so, naturally, I would love to be on the Health and Wellness Committee. I would say, obviously, education is a big one with me as well. As I mentioned, in Mason County alone, 5 of our 6 public school districts rank in the bottom half of the state. 3 of those rank in the bottom 10%. We need to be fully funding our rural public schools. We need to be giving our teachers the resources and tools that they need to be successful in our children's lives. So that's an area. And of course, as a higher ed student, access to higher ed, understanding as well the growing epidemic that is the student loan debt crises. I'm someone who has amassed my fair share of student loan debt, and really would be a strong voice as the youngest member entering the legislature this cycle, would really be a strong voice for students in our community, technical, and higher ed institutions. And as well, of course, there's just so many other committees, improving our transportation infrastructure, of course, is huge in Mason County as well. So there's a lot. I'm certain whatever committee I'm assigned to, it's one of those bloom where you're planted, as I think that any one of them can be effective in improving the outcomes in Mason County in particular. But I would say my definite top choice and hope would be to serve on the Health and Wellness Committee.
Let's talk a little bit about the current times that we're in with coronavirus. One, how has the campaign been going through this? And if you're able to get into the legislature here into the fall, how do you see daily business progressing, and what more can the state do, either to advocate on behalf of the state and the local municipalities to the federal government, or even just what the state can do for folks in the 35th?
Right. Well, I'll start with, how the campaign is going, of course. I launched this campaign in April, so right around when COVID was kind of starting to take off, right after we had really been asked to kind of quarantine ourselves and socially distance. So to a degree, I knew what I was getting into. I knew that the traditional political campaign playbooks were just thrown out the window, and we were going to have to be very innovative and creative with how we were conducting our outreach, that we would be doing a lot more phone calling versus door knocking, that we would be leaning very heavily on our social media interaction, that we would be leaning on sending mailers out. Of course, I miss the inability to go door to door. There's nothing I would love more right now than to meet people where they're at in Mason County right now. I door knocked in 2018 in the Shelton area a lot for Irene Bowling. So I got to know that community quite well. I got to know the Mason County area quite well when I was working with the Mason County Opioid Stakeholder Group. And so I would love nothing more as an extrovert to be knocking on doors and talking with folks. So I would say that is probably the biggest challenge, is just mitigating my extroverted behavior and having to lean on other methods to contact voters. But overall, I feel that we have been able to adapt, which is really what everyone has had to do, of course, in this era of COVID. Look, obviously, heading into this session, we are faced with an immense number of challenges. But most importantly, probably we're entering a fiscal budget crisis unlike none seen since the Great Depression. And I think one of the big, important key takeaways here is that we are finally reckoning with the fact that Washington State has the most regressive tax structure in the nation. That's not, a talking piece. That's not a debate. That's a statement of fact that has been shown time and time again, that we shoulder the burden of our tax code heavily on our working class families, our middle and low income earners. And as we look to getting out of this pandemic, and as we look to our economic recovery, we need to be really reckoning with our tax code, how it's been hurting our working families, especially in Mason County. They've been shouldering the burden with the property and sales tax out in Mason County. We need to be looking at new sources of revenue that can ease that burden. And we need to be making sure, most importantly, one of the key takeaways from the last recession was we made cuts that were deep and lasting, but even more so, we made cuts that hurt people who were most in need. We cannot do that again. We cannot cut our way out of this recession. Obviously, I'm feeling the impacts of that right now, being a furloughed employee, working for the state, and seeing the ramifications of what a regressive tax code looks like. We need to be looking at sources of revenue that are going to level the playing field, that will make the wealthy pay their fair share, that will ease the burden on our working families and small businesses, and that will help us get out of this pandemic without leaving lasting cuts to our social safety net programs.
Colton Myers is running for the 35th legislative district in the state of Washington in position 1. You can find more about him and his issues at electcoltonmyers.com. This has been part of my candidate conversations with the folks running in the 35th, and more of these will be available for you to get a chance to meet all of the candidates, again, running for both positions in the 35th. Thanks for spending some time with me, Colton, this morning, and good to see you, good to talk with you, and good luck out there as we move through and into the primary.
Thank you, Jeff. Very nice to talk to you as well.